Hi, my name is Sarah Koonts, and it is my pleasure to serve as the State Archivist of North Carolina. One of my favorite things to do is to welcome groups of all ages to take a tour of the archives. I really enjoy sharing our collections and the work of our dedicated staff with visitors. But sometimes a behind-the-scenes tour isn't always possible in person, so we thought it would be fun to shoot a virtual behind-the-scenes tour. Before we get started, for more information about the archives, please visit our website at www.archives.ncdcr.gov. And for more information about all things natural and cultural and historical, please visit nclearnathome.gov. At the State Archives, our mission is to collect, preserve, and make available the records that protect citizen rights, document our history and culture, and promote government transparency. We have vast collections that range from our oldest will in 1665 to modern electronic records. And we're fortunate enough to be able to collect private materials from individuals, organizations, and veterans. And these collections supplement and complement the history found in our public records. When you visit us, bring your sense of adventure because there are great discoveries to be made inside the archives. The search room is where you will come if you want to use our original records. When you visit us in the search room, you'll find printed materials, finding aids, and staff available to help you with your search. Now, we have 4 facilities in Raleigh full of materials, and the levels of the stacks behind me have our oldest county records, our oldest state agency materials, including private collections and audiovisual materials. But don't worry, if there's something that you need that's stored in one of our other facilities, we can get it for you pretty quickly. So let's take a look in the stacks and see what we have. Looking at all these rows and rows of shelves reminds me that when we take tours in person, I have to keep a strict count on my people with me on the tour, because on more than one occasion, I've had a tour participant wander off and get so excited by all the great records they see in the stacks that they want to stay behind. And it is pretty fun. We've got a lot of great materials in here, but you probably wouldn't want to linger because it's fairly cold in the stacks. Environmental control is one of our top ways that we use to protect our records. Keeping them cool, dark, and dry keeps them protected. The State Archives has been collecting since 1903, and to give you a little glimpse inside those boxes and volumes that you saw in the stacks, I've pulled out a few samples of materials from across our collections to give you an idea of the rich materials that we have. It includes some county records, some state agency materials, private collections, military records, and audiovisual materials to give you an idea of our wide variety of collections. So our collections have wills from across the state, including from colonial times. I brought out 2 very interesting wills. The first one is from 1665, and it's actually for a woman, which was unusual for the time period, as women couldn't write a will to dispose of property without the husband's consent. But notice that Mary Fortson could also sign her name, a sign that she was literate, which is another unusual fact for the time when very few people could read or write. The next will is from John Rex of Raleigh. His will is from 1838, and he's famous for 2 things. He wanted his property to be divided between his slaves, whom he freed in his will, and for the building of a public hospital in Raleigh. But before those terms could be satisfied, it took many, many years and 2 lawsuits that eventually came before the North Carolina Supreme Court to realize John's wishes. The volume is a very interesting type of county record called an alien and naturalization record, and it was used when the county court had jurisdiction over the citizenship process for immigrants. These records provide a glimpse into the lives of the immigrants arriving in North Carolina, describes a little bit about where they're from and people that know them and vouch for them to become citizens. And if you're lucky, they also contain a picture. There's a fun set of images that we enjoy from the Division of Travel Information, which was within the old Department of Conservation and Development. And these were images that were taken in the 1950s and 60s all across the state as part of a campaign to promote the state to newcomers and encourage tourism. And so these 2 photos that we've pulled from the series include William Morris and his dog Booker T sitting by a fire that was started in 1780 by Morris's great-great-grandfather in Saluda, North Carolina. And then the other image is from Cape Hatteras Lighthouse during Coast Guard days. So the right to petition your government is enshrined in our state and federal constitutions, and it's a very important one. But not all petitions are of the same level of seriousness. The first petition comes from the citizens of Milton, North Carolina in 1831, when they were requesting permission, which only the General Assembly could grant, for a freed woman of color from Virginia to move to the state. and she was to marry Thomas Day, who was a very famous African-American cabinet maker from that area. Then on the not so serious side, we have a petition to the Senate from some citizens in Richmond County in 1799 who were upset with a recent election, and they did not like their elected senator, a man named Duncan McFarland. And this is a long petition, and they have many grievances about McFarland's behavior. But the most fascinating one we find is the one where they basically accuse him of being a werewolf. They say that he had an encounter with a wolf, and on a full moon, he is known to have a lust for blood. This series of records is fascinating because they come from a time period from 1965 at the height of a controversy over a bill that was passed on the last day of the session in 1963. It's commonly known as the speaker ban law because it prohibited known communists from speaking on a campus of the UNC system. The Sanford Herald, a local paper in Sanford, had an informal poll on their paper, and you could clip the corner of that issue and you could write yes or no and write some comments, and it was to be mailed to the governor with your thoughts on the speaker ban law. And these clippings come from the people who mailed in the against vote for the speaker ban law. So we have a lot of fascinating private collections, and this one comes from a series of Civil War letters between Martha and Francis Poteet. They were from McDowell County. In this letter from June of 1864, Martha is writing to her husband and talking about the farm and the status of the crops and the upcoming election. But what's fascinating about this particular letter is she encloses a tracing of an infant child's hand, and she asks her husband to provide a name for their daughter who is newly born. So she advises him that he should provide her with the name for the child. So we also have a lot of really great materials in our military collections. The first one contains a roster of soldiers from the Eastern Band of the Cherokee who reported for the draft in World War I. As far as we know, one-of-a-kind list. The next collection is from the Warren Mcneil papers from World War I. Warren Mcneil was a sailor on the USS Louisiana, and they were stationed off the East Coast training gunners. And he took a lot of pictures. This collection has a lot of great pictures of life on the ship and also life on the shore, including one of our favorites where he and another sailor are kissing local girls, and he liked to title all of his pictures, and that one's titled Some Party. And finally, I pulled some scrapbooks from Scotland County from World War II. So one of the ways that school children supported the war effort was to participate in scrap drives and victory gardens and things like that. And the school children had the opportunity to report on their activities by creating scrapbooks. And we're fortunate that several of these survive in our collection, things that were going on locally to make sure that soldiers had enough resources for the war effort in World War II. So you've been to the stacks, you've seen a few of our collections, and now it's time for everyone's favorite part of the tour, the security vault, where you get to see some of our most important treasures. We have 2 security vaults in Raleigh, and their real purpose, their main purpose, is to store backups of essential records, just in case something really bad were to happen and we would need to recreate some records. But in this vault, we also have space for some very, very important treasures. Let's get this door open and take a look inside. So now we're in the space in the vault where we store some of our treasures. To get put into the vault, a document has to be very, very valuable, and it can be valuable for a number of reasons. And I've pulled out a few today that we'll share with you. In the vault, we have extra special precautions to take care of these treasures, and that includes a separate air conditioning system, separate fire suppression, and extra security to keep these things around absolutely forever. Sometimes things are in the vault because they're valuable for their signature and who signed them, and this is a good example of that. And as I'm getting these out, notice that there are special custom boxes made for each one of the materials in the vault. So this is kind of a step up of protections beyond those standard archives boxes that you saw for regular collections. So this is what you call a letter of marque, which basically gives someone permission to be a privateer. This comes from the Revolutionary War time period, and the signature on here that's so valuable, you might notice as the famous John Hancock. He was president of the Continental Congress. So there's that famous John Hancock, and that makes this document very valuable. Some documents are important to North Carolina's history and national history, and this is an example of that. This is a document that's called Thoughts on Government, and it's written by John Adams. You may remember him as our first Vice President and second President of the United States. But if you put your mind to the Continental Congress time period during the Revolutionary War, the leaders in North Carolina asked their delegates to speak to John Adams when they were at the Congress and ask about what did he think good government would look like. And he answered them in the form of a letter. And I'll hold up these pages for you. So this is a handwritten letter by John Adams where he's sitting down and he's writing out some of his ideas about what good government would look like. And a lot of these ideas in here we will find in the federal Constitution eventually and in the North Carolina Constitution. So the next time you're studying history and you read about the pamphlet Thoughts on Government, know that the first version of this was written for North Carolina. Some of our treasures talk about important points in North Carolina's development, as is the case with this document. I want you to notice how small it is when I show you what it is. So this is from 1792, and it was created by William Christmas, and he was a surveyor and a senator. He was charged with laying out the original plan for the City of Raleigh. And this is that fairly small document. He laid it out with about 400 acres, and you'll notice the streets are named on the sides here and in the document. But the next time you're visiting Raleigh, pay attention that north, south, east, and west were the original boundaries of the city. And that's not a very big area. We surely have grown since 1792. Some of our treasures connect us to very important people in U.S. history and speak to North Carolina citizens through time. And that's this document, and it's one of my favorites in our collection. Notice it's got a very fancy box. You'll see it's got a velvet lining. You'll note why when you see what it is. So this is a letter from 1790, and you can see it's addressed to the governor and the Council of State. And it's a handwritten letter, so that's important to keep in mind when you see who signed it. It's double-sided, and I'll flip it over in a minute. But the backstory on this letter is that North Carolina did not initially vote to ratify the Constitution when it was up for consideration. And that's because we felt very strongly that the Constitution needed a Bill of Rights. So once the Bill of Rights was proposed and sent to all the states, North Carolina in a second constitutional convention did ratify the Constitution. And upon hearing that, this letter was sent to the leaders of North Carolina and really to all citizens. And the letter is from George Washington. Remember when I said it was all in his hand? That's fairly unusual at this time. Usually his secretary would write his letters, but this is all in his hand. And it's a personal letter expressing his gratitude to the leaders of North Carolina for their sentiments on his behalf recently, as well as welcoming us to the Union. So that's why this letter gets a velvet-lined box. It's very special. And some of our treasures, again, might be in small boxes, but they speak to big, important time periods in North Carolina's history, as is the case with this one. So this is a book. It's a pretty rare to find a copy of this book, but it's called The Constitutional Reader. It was published at St. Augustine's University, right up the road here in Raleigh. And it comes from a time period when African Americans were being denied the right to vote, when they were being asked to take citizenship tests or literacy tests. And this is a book written so that people could study for that test. And it goes over things like the Constitution and spelling and grammar and words and anything you might be asked in one of those tests. So the point of this book is to educate people so they could overcome that barrier and exercise their right to vote. So some treasures capture all of the value, and this big one is one of those treasures. And this is probably my favorite document in our collection, just because it really takes us back to the beginning of North Carolina's history, and it's really beautiful. This is page 1 of the Carolina Charter of 1663. So this is a charter from the king to the Lords Proprietors to start the colony of Carolina, which really then was North and South Carolina together. So we sort of informally call this North Carolina's birth certificate. And it's a beautiful document. Page 1 has the picture of the king in the corner and this wonderful border along the top. And then all these words are basically a big legal contract allowing the Lords Proprietors to form a government, sell land, collect taxes, do what they needed to do to set up the colony of Carolina. It's 4 sheets on parchment, which is animal skin, and they would have been held together at the bottom with a cord and the giant seal of the king. Well, I want to thank you for joining me today on this virtual behind-the-scenes tour, and I hope that one day soon you can come visit us in person.